Hey everybody, and welcome to episode number 7 of our Fundamentals for Success series, all part of our Love Strong podcast. I've got our special guest today, Ivan Domine.
It's a pleasure to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Really excited to have you on. If you don't know Ivan, he is the production manager over all weld facilities here at Diamond C. And so tell him a little bit about what that actually entails.
Well, it's really overseeing the whole production from the getting raw material in to putting all those components together, welding them, and sending them to our counterpart, which is powder coat.
Absolutely. So anything that's done, any work that's done prior to the trailer getting painted is under your umbrella.
Correct.
Right? So, and that's a major part. I mean, you've got how many? 3 buildings, 6 shops.
3 buildings, around 12 to 13 lines of production.
Wow.
Yeah.
So big operation, and we're only growing, right?
Correct.
You're having to really think process oriented to scale and get capacity, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's why I'm glad that I was able to get you on this week, because that's really what I wanted to talk about was the fundamental of the week, and what we're talking about is think process oriented. And I mean, who better than the overseer of all of our production of our weld lines and main production. And so I'm going to read the fundamental real quick before we dive too deep into the fundamental and all that it entails. I'm going to read the fundamental to make sure that we don't lose any of its intentionality, any of its class. So fundamental number 25, think process oriented. World-class organizations are built on a foundation of highly effective, repeatable processes. Look to create processes and feedback loops for every aspect of your work, and then turn them into habits to achieve consistent results. So when you hear that fundamental, when you see it pop up, fundamental of the week, we're talking about think process oriented, what jumps out to you? What speaks to you?
Man, it's really a trait that is a necessity for a leader to have. That's when I hear that, it's like, it screams leadership to me.
Absolutely.
I mean, because without that, leader can't be an effective leader. I mean, he's the one planning the road for his team, and without a good strategy, I mean, that leader is just going to sink the boat with all the guys in it. So. Sure,
absolutely. So is there any phrase in there that really seems to catch the core essence of this fundamental? Is there anything in that, it's a paragraph, is there any one part that you latch on to?
Really, for me, I would almost say it's almost part of my strengths of discipline, which is almost like a habit. Like
sure.
Creating good habits for my guys, for my team, to ensure their success. That's something that screams to me in that fundamental.
Absolutely. I mean, in that fundamental, it talks about creating processes that are repeatable.
Yeah.
Not only are they effective, but then repeatable. And so what's more effective and repeatable than habitual processes, things that become habits. So yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about think process oriented, and we're walking around Diamond C, and we're managing all of the weld facilities, give our listeners some examples or some application of how you really use this fundamental to be successful.
So there's this dichotomy of being goal-oriented versus being process-oriented. And you find it all over the internet, all in social media, of how you have to be process-oriented. And completely agree with that. But you also have to have a goal that you need to achieve. So to me, it's almost a fine balance between what do you want to achieve and how are you going to achieve it. And like, for example, for us, I mean, we have goals set out for ourselves of, fueling the growth of the team members, customers, and community. I mean, that's a big goal, and it's a very broad goal.
Right.
So how are you going to break it down into steps? I mean, what daily habits do I have to set for my team to ensure the success of everyone?
Absolutely. I think you make a really good point there of thinking process oriented can't be a selfish perspective where it doesn't work, right?
Can't.
I mean, you go back to other fundamental, like win-win agreements, right? If you're setting up repeatable, effective processes, but they're not win-win, right? They're not helping others be successful. A, we're not satisfying our purpose. And B, they're probably not going to be very repeatable very long because,
Correct.
You're entering into a win-lose agreement or a lose-lose. So absolutely. I mean, so like break down, let's dive a little deeper into this process versus goal oriented. And why do you think that there is kind of that dichotomy? Like, what is it that's so different about a goal-oriented approach to a process-oriented approach?
So, I mean, I think where social media got into it and why it got so divided into, we all first started of, you got to be goal-oriented to be successful. And I think where you started breaking it down is when you realize that, well, crap, to achieve a goal, you actually need to have a process.
Absolutely.
To make it happen. Because then you get into that realm of, man, that goal's unachievable. That's too hard. I'm just going to quit. Yeah. And that's where you find a lot of people quitting high goals that they probably could achieve, but they didn't have a process.
Or we live in the world of instant gratification, right?
Correct.
If I can't try one time and repeat one process once and get to where I want to go, then now I'm just going to move the goalpost.
It's also another funny thing is like, once you achieve a goal, there's also that little sense of dissatisfaction of, man, what am I going to do next?
Sure.
And you can go even to the fundamental of be relentless about progress.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty cool because, I mean, if you ask yourself, why is it that you get dissatisfied once you achieve a goal? Well, I mean, as human beings, I think we're wired to find a purpose for a living.
Absolutely. I mean, I think right there, you just hit the nail on the head for why thinking process oriented and why it's such a crucial fact is when we achieve, right? And then it stops, that achievement, that goal, that success isn't repeatable in our, it's not repeatable. It's an individual process. And so we desire, we're not satisfied because we're looking to restart that process to achieve again, And
honestly, I think that's for my side, I think that's where I got hooked in the love of the grind.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add one thing on that whenever your goal is finite and your goal is attainable in that measure of, I want to build this many trailers today. Boom, got it. I want to build that many trailers tomorrow. You can do that, but you're wrapped up in that finite individual goal. Whereas what you said earlier, when it's purpose driven, right? When we're satisfying our purpose as a company, well, now I have to keep repeating that process. I'm never truly obtaining the goal. I'm fulfilling the process. I'm achieving. I am succeeding, but it's repeatable. And so as we continue every day to come in and think process oriented.
Yeah, you get so dived into the process that before you know it, you actually achieved your goal already. And then you go like, oh, I'm already there.
Yeah.
Man, what's next?
Well, I could have done more. Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. And that's what, and we do this every week where it's like you talk about one fundamental and then next thing you know, 6 or 7, creep into the be relentless about progress. But you're right. I mean, even that came up when me and Valentine talked about being relentless about progress is it's got to be a process because when he gets done, they've got a process for designing a trailer for, creating new innovative designs. They have processes, they have procedures that they follow and, it leads them to success.
Yeah.
But when they say, hey, here's our design, here's we're ready to, to present and send into production, they don't stop. It's not, there's no finish line for them. They go back and they redesign and they re-innovate and they re-examine everything they do. And, Valentine talked about this, where he looks back at 10 years ago and he just sit there and think, man, that was a dumb decision that I made. He's like reevaluating things that he did with the trailer industry and trailers he designed and things he did because he's been so long just reevaluating, growing and learning that he's distanced himself so far from those decisions that were, he thought were good and ready and in the moment were perfect. And, now he looks back and he's progressed so much and his process has continued.
Something about leadership that it's funny that sometimes we're our hardest critic and we don't recognize how we celebrate our wins. But if you really are working process oriented and if you're really thinking process oriented, you actually are celebrating wins. I mean, you're recognizing that little progress like, man, 10 years ago, I was here.
Yeah.
And now I'm here.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's a plus for thinking process oriented.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the key of the application, right? Is that you have to have these obtainable goals, right? Like let's dive into a bunch of fundamentals real quick. Like we have to deliver results.
Correct.
At the end of the day, if the trailer doesn't come out extraordinary, we're not fueling our purpose. We're not delivering results. We're not going to be successful. But embedded in that is we have to have a process, and it says it word for word, to get consistent results. We want every customer's trailer that orders, a FleetNet HDT to get the same quality of FleetNet HDT hydraulic dovetail. I'll say that for anyone not in the industry, but we want everyone to get that same extraordinary product, and without a repeatable process, it just can't happen.
Correct.
So let's move a little deeper, a little further, and we're going to kind of get out of the trailer realm for a little bit, and let's talk about personal. Let's talk about as an individual, and when we're thinking process oriented in the theory of process orientation. And so one thing that I really want to strive for every podcast, every episode, is to give the listeners something they can take back. So not only do they get on track of saying, okay, now I understand how to think process oriented, but they have something in their back pocket to identify and catch themselves when they begin to stray. When we begin to, after 6 weeks and life keeps coming, we've had to climb mountains and, got hit in the face, and plans have changed. How do we reevaluate, and what are some signals or some signs that maybe you use or you say in your life to say, okay, that wasn't process oriented. I need to make sure that I'm doing this in a process orientation.
Okay. Well, I just want to make something clear. Like, even if you make a process, there is times where you will fail. Your process might not be the correct one. So it's going to be almost of a managing the state of mind you're in. Of, okay, evaluating yourself. Okay, did my process, did I not reach my goal because my process wasn't good enough, or my process wasn't the correct one?
Sure.
I mean, because otherwise you'll end up in the same boat as just being goal oriented, and you'll get demotivated and go start from square one.
Right. And I mean, on that, if you didn't develop a process, even if it was bad, right? Even if the process stunk, if you don't have a lined out step-by-step procedural approach, when you realize it's bad, when you realize it stinks, you're not going to be able to go back and
Correct.
And look at what you did. If you're flying from the...
So that's one of the things of being goal-oriented. Like, if you don't have the process, you really don't know what you did wrong. I mean, you're just going through the swings and trying to hit that goal, but you don't have a strategic way of getting there, versus a process-oriented where you have everything detailed out. Here's a plan. This is what I got to do when. And you follow that plan. I was like, well, I did this and this and this, but it still didn't get me there. Okay, why didn't it get me there?
So what are some red flags that maybe identifiers or things that says, hey, if you see yourself doing this or you notice this, maybe you need to go back and reevaluate yourself on this fundamental?
I think one main one is having that sense where you're being hard on yourself, of that sense of feeling like you want to quit.
Okay.
Simply because, acknowledging yourself that maybe you didn't actually have a good process, and setting your ego aside and acknowledging that. It's like, okay, maybe as a leader, I didn't have the best plan or the best strategy to achieve the end result goal I wanted. Okay, so you got to acknowledge, go back, check your ego. It's funny how we go to those fundamentals, but really self-analyze yourself, and maybe my process wasn't good enough.
I love that. Check your ego. And what I thought of when you were talking about is keep the faith.
Yeah.
Is if you notice that you're losing faith, then you probably don't have a process that you can feel that you can go back and make the corrections necessary. Because, you talked about you lose when you're goal oriented, you lose motivation.
Correct.
Well, when you lose motivation, that means you lose faith in your ability to achieve what you set out to achieve. It's kind of, and so I think about, not only do you have to check your ego to reevaluate and to start, but if you're losing faith in your ability to succeed, if you're losing faith in your ability to to deliver results, then you probably need to go back and reanalyze yourself as far as process oriented goes.
Yeah.
As far as, am I thinking process oriented? Do I have a lined out process? Because if you have a lined out process and you've thought it out and you've done the work to think process oriented, well, then when you miss, when you don't hit, you can go back, root cause, IDS, which we, identify, discuss, and solve, and come back with another approach and maintain that faith that I'm not going to get it right the first, the second, the third time, but as long as I keep tweaking and be relentless about progress and move forward each day, each step, each tweak to my process, then eventually, right, I'll get there.
Well, eventually when you analyze if you have a process and you analyze it because you didn't achieve your goal you wanted, I mean, you'll notice that, hey, I missed a step. I didn't go 100% on my process. Like I skipped corners. And that's where you also got to acknowledge is like, well, dang, I didn't follow the plan to the T like I should have.
Right.
So maybe that's why it failed.
I think about myself when I was younger of how, you have all these dreams and you have all these goals and you're very goal oriented, or at least I was.
Yeah.
Everyone's got the stars in their eyes. They're going to go, solve all the world problems and it's great. But a lot of times we don't, as youth, we're so goal-oriented that we don't start setting the process. Okay, like what's step one? How do I get there? And so then we end up, just living life for 4 years of high school, and then we get into college and we realize, I'm not gonna get into Stanford because I didn't, set the process up, and then we fell short of our goal because we didn't.
Yeah, it's funny because kind of yesterday we were talking a little bit about it, but like even the generations, how generations have been transformed through years of we almost discussed of parenting. Of what led to where we are now.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of research done on why the generations are so different because what our parents went through and how they were raised is really a big reflection of how their parents and they were raised in the environment. And you think about World War II and Vietnam War and that kind of American exceptionalism and all of that push that we had, and then our parents were raised from that generation, and then we get the parenting style from that. Yeah. But then how we react, and then you take in our environment where we have to go through 9/11 and this kind of different feel of an environment and different feel of and perception of our reality and what we live through and all that, and it just changes everyone's approach, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's something that, we were talking about it yesterday, but just how we derive to creating a culture where we started maybe in a couple generations back where, they were very disciplined, and then slowly transformed into a goal-oriented culture. And then now it's almost like it's going back in time and okay, now we're getting into more discipline. Now we got to focus on the process again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the journey now. Yeah. And so, you hinted on something, and I was going to try and get there. And the last kind of point I want to make is like in the personal life, one thing that jumps out to me on the personal side, and you said parenting, right, is whenever you think about the routines that you use at home to really drive consistent results. If you have kids, you understand what we're talking about of where, they are products of their routine. They are products of their environment, and especially, under 5, they are hyper reactive to the food that you give them, to the time they go to sleep.
To the habits you imply in them.
Absolutely. To the words you use, because if you say a word once, they're going to repeat it, and then that's watch your language, right? Yeah, right. They're everywhere. But I think that's a good example of if you're not getting consistent results in usually I think parenting, because that's the easiest because the results are immediate. That's
a big flag. If you're not getting the results you want consistently,
right,
then that's where you got to go back to the drawing board and analyze your process.
Right. And as much as it's not as clear cut as, welding, right? Like when you have a process for handling materials don't have feelings, emotions, motive, goals, whatever you want to, they don't possess the spirit.
But your team does,
of the being. Right.
And that's where you could actually acknowledge it. Like if there's stress and frustration in your team, something is not going as you planned it.
Absolutely.
So that's also another.
There's something in the process, whether it's the accountability feedback loops or
maybe I don't have a leader in the right spot. Maybe
Right.
The team wasn't trained properly. Something is not working right in the process.
Right.
So,
And if you don't have that process outlined, if you're not thinking process oriented, then you have no tools to work with.
yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to find that. It's almost going to be like finding a needle in a haystack.
Right. I think that I just made a connection that I have. If you don't think process oriented, then there's no way you can be relentless about progress.
Oh, no.
It was, it's like the idea of
You're flying blindly.
work hard, but
Yeah.
you're just running in the wrong direction. It's like hyper efficiency.
Hopefully I get there.
Yeah, you're super efficient, but ultra ineffective. And so, well, that was some great content, Ivan. I really appreciate you coming on. I hope that you all enjoyed this week's Fundamentals for Success podcast. We talked about think process oriented, and next week we're on to fundamental number 26, deliver results. But real quick, I wanted to do a little giveaway for all of us that are actually tuning in to the podcast. So the first 10 people to email me with the code word discipline, email me at this email address with the code word discipline, will receive a little Diamond C surprise. So
Nice.
Shoot me an email. My email address is right there on the screen. Until then, join us next week. We have another special guest coming on, and do work and love strong. Have a good one.